All right, greetings everybody. Dr. Schiller here. So, there are some confusing beliefs in our culture that keep a lot of people sick and suffering. And two of them are particularly difficult or toxic. One of them is that you might think somebody else is going to fix you. And the second one is that there could be some sort of quick fix where your chronic pain or chronic illness is going to go away, like right away when you start doing whatever it is that you might start doing to help it. And I just want to share with you why that's not a good way to think, why it's counterproductive, and how it's the opposite of how things really work. Because what that does is potentially invites you to open your mindset to think about things in a way that is more productive, that actually might bring you some real solutions that could help you. The key thing is like this: chronic pain and chronic illness are learned. Learned. Okay, that might sound kind of strange because when you think of learned, you might think like, oh, I sat down and read a book and I wanted to learn French or how to cook or whatever it is you might want to learn. It's not what we're talking about here, but we are talking about a process over time where the physiology, the biology of your body actually practices and reinforces and develops certain patterns. And that's how chronic pain happens. That's how chronic illness happens. And the key thing is learning how that happens so you can learn how to unlearn it. And you can relearn how to live well and actually to help your body heal. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about chronic pain, for instance. Like a lot of people who have chronic pain after there was some kind of trigger, there was an injury, maybe it was surgery, maybe it was an infection, maybe it was some kind of trauma or damage or a fall. And then what sometimes gradually happens is that the thing just gets worse over time, right? There can be worsening of pain in the actual region that got hurt. And then there can be like a spreading of pain. So it might start in the person's foot or hip and then it spreads to their back or whatever it is, goes to a different part of the body. Sometimes it can affect the whole body. Sometimes there can be issues with other organ systems that create secondary sources of pain, changes in the brain, the nerve, the muscle tissue. There can be things that drive chronic illness or even turn up pain sensitization. And that involves shifting in biochemistry of brain function, shifting in psychological function, hormones, intestinal function, the balance of the immune system. These are all things that can worsen chronic pain, that can create secondary sources of pain, and that can generate chronic illness. So let's try to understand like how that happens. I just want to give like an example of what I'm talking about in case it's not clear yet. A woman I'll call Jane, she was actually one of my first patients when I finished residency 20 years ago. And I learned so much from her and other people like her. She basically had fallen down. She was a teacher. She got knocked over by some students. She was trying to break up a fight. And she hit her head, she hit her shoulder, and she had what you describe mild, moderate injuries. She wasn't really messed up from it. She wasn't in the hospital. But gradually she developed shoulder pain that spread all the way down her arm. She started developing headaches. She couldn't use her arm. She held her arm like someone who had had a stroke. She had headaches that were disabling. She developed all sorts of psychological challenges. She was in her mid-30s and she was disabled. She wasn't working. And she had gone to many doctors, and all of them tried what I was taught to do when I was in medical school and residency is, let's try this thing, let's try that thing, let's try this medication. And the thing is, we weren't really looking at what was going on with her physiology. And so let's talk about what that is, what happens physiologically. And what I'm going to share with you is kind of a digest of what I've learned from reading medical research and basic science research. A lot of this is stuff that isn't in the clinic yet. It's well known that a lot of basic science research doesn't make it to clinical practice for 10, 20, 30 years because it's a whole other thing to like understand what's going on than it is to develop like randomized control trials with lots and lots of people that convince most doctors so that things get into practice. But the challenge is when someone comes to you who's got this chronic problem, who's tried all the first line things that the best neurosurgeons and neurologists and orthopedic surgeons try. So what do you do then? And that's the kind of patients I've been seeing for 20 years. So that's what I'm speaking from, is that experience. So let's think about this underlying principle that we call neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity means the brain, spinal cord, and nerves change over time. In response to experience, they change their function, they change their connectivity. Let's unpack that a little bit. Let's talk first of all just about the sensitivity of nerves to pain. So you got a nerve in your finger and you get a bad injury on your finger and it burns or it hurts, and that sends a signal up to your spinal cord, and from there it goes up to your brain, and from the core of your brain where all of the sensory and emotional and cognitive information is processed, it goes to the part of your brain that experiences pain. The nerve itself, when it is persistently stimulated, reorganizes. It changes DNA synthesis. It changes synthesis of proteins and ion channels and various kinds of sort of biological properties that affect how that nerve responds to stimulation and how it functions. And so you can get spreading of pain around the area of injury, and you can get a situation where that nerve sends out signals that are wrong. So that's the classic thing, someone who's got nerve pain and you gently stroke the hand or something and it feels like fire and it burns. Or someone who's got neuropathy in their feet where they can't stand the sheets sitting on their toes at night so they can't sleep. That's sensitization of the nerves. And that is a physiologic change that happens over time in that nerve. A similar thing happens in that whole tract going up to the part of your brain in the sensory cortex that says, ow, my hand hurts. Because those interconnections, they're called synapses, right? So one nerve talks to another nerve through a synapse. So the signal comes down the nerve and it gets to this junction that's called a synapse. It's between the two nerves. And what happens is the signal gets down, and if it's strong enough, it causes that nerve to release some juice into the space between the nerves. And that juice is chemicals. It's neurotransmitter chemicals. And those contact that secondary nerve and stimulate the nerve to do various things. And if they stimulate it in a strong enough way, that secondary nerve fires. And those two nerves are in relationship with each other. And the more that this one fires and makes this fire, the more they get used to firing. That's why they like to quote, nerves that fire together wire together. What that means is that the synapse, as it gets more frequently active, as it's stimulated with a strong stimulus, it gets more active. So they're kind of like good buddies talking to each other. They already know what the other guy's going to say. They're already in conversation. They remodel their connection so it becomes more sensitive. Now, the function of your entire brain, spinal cord, and body is built on thousands of nerves talking to each other. You've got regions of your brain that do certain properties, regions of your brain that do other functions, and the connectivity between all of those parts of your brain is what determines how well your brain or body works. And all of that is subject to this principle of neuroplasticity, where nerves that fire together wire together. So suppose that somebody has a horrible traumatic accident, and part of that is that they develop a painful thing happening in their tissue or their body. It's an injury, a wound, a break, whatever it is. It's painful. It's constantly sending a signal that's sensitizing. Meanwhile, they also had a traumatic experience, and that traumatic car accident or bomb going off, or whatever it was, God forbid, creates a situation where they're in a stress response. They're in a danger response. Their system is stuck in that trauma. And that represents certain areas of the brain, often the limbic system, the frontal cortex, that are interacting with each other and firing off this persistent pattern of, I'm scared, it's not safe to be me. All the information about your emotional reality is integrated with the information of your sensory reality. And so a traumatic experience that is practiced, so to speak, over time, that becomes set into that person's neurophysiology, habitually changes the pain transmission system. And that's probably, and it seems to be, why we see it so often that people who have persistent or have had significant traumatic events often develop chronic pain, because the processing of pain and the processing of stress, a sense of danger, a sense of lack of safety, grief, anger, frustration, are intimately connected with each other. So that's just kind of one example of how habitual experience of trauma stimulates habitual experience of pain, and it's a vicious cycle. And that is a learning process that gets worse over time in many cases. And the issue is how to unlearn that. It gets richer and deeper though, okay? Okay, so we're going to take a break right now. And cut this and we'll get to the continuation of this topic in the next video. Summing up, there is a foundation physiologically about why chronic pain and chronic illness are really learning processes, and how you can, by understanding that, unlearn them. That's where we're going with this. The whole idea is for you to understand how the learning process may have happened in you so that you can make positive choices to unlearn the negative stuff and install learning for the positive stuff and actually bring yourself towards healing. So please look out for the next part of the video of the same name, and we'll continue with the topic.